Hello, welcome to Microfiche Microphone. I'm Micah, and on this channel we look at microfiche from the past, old newspaper articles in the public domain. We look at them with our modern eyes, our modern perspective, and see what we can learn from them. On this microfiche time capsule, we are looking back at the Juvenile Instructor from the 1st of October, 1900, and this article is the continuation of our Lives of Our Leaders series, and it's called Lives of Our Leaders, the Apostles, John W. Taylor. No, I did not read that wrong. John W. Taylor, not John Taylor. He is the son of John Taylor. John Whitaker Taylor, I believe, was his middle name. And let's just get some vital statistics before we move on. I do know a little bit about this one because this is one of the people I had written an article about, which I mentioned before, so that I have written articles about some of them. So John W. Taylor was born on the 15th of May, 1858, called to the Quorum of the Twelve in 1884. He resigned from the Quorum in 1905. So this article was written before that happened, and we will discuss that afterwards. But this article takes place before that. So he was excommunicated in 1911, and he died in 1916. Yes, he was a son of John Taylor, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, he was very close friends with Matthias Cowley. So, I'm sure we will hear about that. I don't want to give away too much because I feel like sometimes I get to chatting, and I do know a little bit about this guy, so I don't want to give away too much about it. But he was a very enthusiastic missionary. All right, so Lives of Our Leaders, the Apostles, John W. Taylor. At the time when Johnston's army was approaching Utah with hostile intent, the saints living in Salt Lake City prepared to burn their homes and then moved southward to various places in Utah County. The late President John Taylor and family were among the exiles. Yeah, that was actually pretty well known. They located temporarily in Provo, where they rented from Roger Farrer a house of small dimensions and unpretentious appearance. In this humble abode, the subject of this sketch was born on the 15th of May, 1858. Okay, I was wondering where they were going with that. Upon the settlement of the trouble which caused the exodus from the northern settlements, President Taylor and his family returned to their home in the 14th Ward, Salt Lake City. Here, Brother John W. was reared in the paternal home until he attained his 25th year, when he married and removed to Cassia County, Idaho. You know, that's kind of reasonable. I feel like the last few we've read, they got married quite young, 17, 18. Yeah, and the fact that he didn't leave home until he was 25, I feel like that is much more reasonable, compared to like what we expect of young people today. In his boyhood days, as in later life, he was industrious in his habits, being richly endowed with bodily health and a strong, active mind. He worked some at farming and spent considerable time laboring in his father's sawmill, which was near Camas, toward the headwaters of the Provo River. His father being somewhat hampered financially, the children's opportunities for scholastic education were not so abundant as those afforded the sons and daughters of some other families. But with President Taylor, the education acquired in the schoolroom, though not depreciated in the least, was regarded only as a small part of the broader education to be gained in the practical walks of life. He taught his children with great emphasis that whatever they undertook to do, they should seek to do well. That people, on examining a piece of work they admired, would first ask who did it, but would care little about knowing what length of time it required to complete it. He taught them to respect each other's rights, and instead of governing his family by personal direction, he instructed them upon the principles of righteousness, and placed them upon their own responsibility to act for themselves. The grand and noble principles he sought to implant within the hearts of his children were conspicuously exemplified in his own life. And withal he possessed a spirituality and a veneration for God and truth so great that few men in this world have equaled him in the possession of such qualities. The mother of John W., Sophia Whitaker Taylor, was of a highly spiritual nature. She was patient, industrious, and God-fearing. Indeed, she was the ideal type of a true saint. No one of the numerous posterity of President Taylor inherited more of his excellent characteristics or developed them in a stronger measure than did his son John W. In his early youth, he displayed an understanding of principle usually found only in persons of more mature years. He attended Sunday schools and meetings with great regularity, and with his bosom friend and neighbor Matthias F. Cowley, studied the scriptures and memorized scores of passages bearing upon the most important principles of the gospel. I remember this, of the many things that young people could get up to together. A pair of best friends, Matthias F. Cowley and John W. Taylor, hung out together all the time, sitting around memorizing scriptures. Like, of all things you could spend your time doing, that's kind of impressive, And that's just what they like to do. I think that's just, it's just one of those things where you're like, oh, okay, if that's what you like doing, I guess, it's not what I do for fun, but to each his own, By the time he concluded his first mission in the southern states, he had memorized and arranged in systematic order some 400 such passages, chiefly from the Old and New Testaments. Yeah. Yep, that's what they did for fun. I just think it's very funny. And, surprising. At about the age of 14 years, he was ordained a deacon and magnified his calling by the faithful performance of the duties of that office. 2 years later, he became a teacher in the ward and worked faithfully in this capacity for a number of years. After receiving his blessings in the house of the Lord and being ordained an elder, he was chosen counselor with Brother Matthias F. Cowley to President Edward W. Davis of the Elders Quorum of the Salt Lake Stake of Zion. Yeah, he was counselor, he was either first or second counselor to the stake president at a very young age, with his best friend, I like that they got to work together in the church. In this capacity, he also collected donations for the building of the Salt Lake Temple, at a time when contributions for that purpose were raised through the quorums of the Holy Priesthood. Brother Taylor was also an active worker in the 14th Ward Sunday School. He had charge of the primary class, consisting of about 100 pupils. Can you imagine being in charge of 100 children? I'm just saying, I have been primary president of, 20, I can't even imagine having 100. His ability to entertain and at the same time to impress the children with good, sound doctrine was very marked. He possessed a vein of humor and a happy faculty for making appropriate comparisons which enable him to attract and retain the attention of children. The late General Assistant Superintendent of Sunday Schools, Elder George Goddard, pronounced Brother Taylor the best primary teacher he knew of in the church. Isn't that great? Being known for memorizing scriptures and teaching primary well. That's kind of wholesome and cute. I really like it. A little incident which occurred one day in his Sunday school class will show his practical way of teaching and at the same time illustrate his novel yet graceful and effective manner of correcting what he regarded as an erroneous idea. The 14th Ward Meeting House being near to the principal hotels of the city, tourists from the east and west would frequently visit the Sunday school of that ward. Upon one occasion, when a large number of these visitors came into Brother Taylor's classroom, he invited some of them to address the children. One religious gentleman exhorted the children to be very prayerful and reminded them how a nice prayer was the simple rhyme, "Now I lay me down to sleep, I pray the Lord my soul to keep. If I should die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take." This little verse he repeated to the children several times and sought to impress the beauty of it upon their minds. When he concluded his remarks, Brother Taylor arose and questioned the pupils in substance about as follows. "How many of you say your prayers?" All hands went up. "When do you pray?" The answer came, "Night and morning." "To whom do you pray?" "To the Lord," was the ready response. "For what do you pray?" "We pray for what we want." Again came the answer. "Very good," said the teacher. "These ladies and gentlemen are going on a visit to California. Would you like them to have a good time and return home alive and well?" "Yes, sir," was the hearty reply. "How will you help them to do that?" inquired the teacher. "By praying for them." Once more came the children's explanation. "Will you say in your prayer, 'Now I lay me down to sleep,' etc.?" asked the teacher, leading the class to the point he wished to make and gently reproving the visiting speaker by the emphasis he placed upon the question. "No, sir," shouted the children in chorus. "Then what will you say in your prayer?" came the final question. "We'll ask the Lord to keep the train from jumping the track," was the sensible reply. The lesson thus taught would not be forgotten very soon either by the children or the visitor. Yeah, you have to correct doctrine when it's mistaught, yeah? And I think that he took that opportunity very well. to like redirect the children and to teach it correctly. And I think that's really the right way to go about it. And I don't know that you necessarily need to directly address what had been taught incorrectly. Sometimes you do, but I don't know if you always need to. But sometimes it's just enough to say, what is the correct thing, children? Go ahead and, So I don't know. It's very good that he addressed it directly if he felt like it needed to be. But you don't always need to. But yeah, I do like that he did correct it in the moment. At this period, Brother Taylor was only about 19 years old. He was still living at home at the time, yeah? And was, besides being a Sunday school teacher, a worker in the Mutual Improvement Association, a teacher in the ward, and a counselor in the Elders' Quorum. And for daily employment, he secured a position in the county recorder's office. He afterwards was employed for some time in the office of the Deseret News. As a penman, he was among the best in the country. Yeah, just like Heber J. Grant, yeah? And his ingenuity in mechanical pursuits was also of an exceptional order. Yeah, he was kinesthetic, yeah, he liked to put things together. In his boyhood days, while working at his father's sawmill, he received some remarkable dreams that were prophetic in their nature, and which have since been verified. These manifestations were living testimonies to him that Jesus is the Christ, and that Joseph Smith was truly a prophet of God. So vivid were these dreams that they are as clear on his memory today as when they were given. In 1876, he received a patriarchal blessing under the hands of Patriarch William McBride, in which his call to the public ministry was predicted, together with other most remarkable prophecies, several of which have already been fulfilled. In the fall of 1880, Elder Taylor was called upon a mission to the southern states, and, with Elder Matthias F. Cowley, the companion of his boyhood, was assigned by President John Morgan to introduce the gospel to Terrell and Randolph counties, southwest Georgia, they being the first elders in that part of the state. Yeah, they were mission companions as well. So they're best friends, they worked together in the stake, and now they're mission companions. Like, they just were besties, yeah? He labored in those two counties during the winter of 1880 to 1881, baptized 2 individuals, and bore testimony to hundreds of people. In the spring, the 2 elders went north to Clayton, Campbell, and Henry counties, where they labored a few months, and after the conference of the state, held in Haralson County, he labored with Elder William J. Packer in Polk and other counties, where in a short time between 30 and 40 people received the gospel through their administration. Elder Taylor was then sent to the state of Kentucky. Here he labored with Jacob G. Bigler with great success, baptizing about 18 people. He was released in the spring of 1882. So I think that's quite impressive. Like, if you look at those numbers, like, that's really high. Yeah? Like, I didn't baptize that many people on my mission, I'm just saying. During this mission, he enjoyed much power in preaching the gospel, and the spirit of prophecy rested upon him to a great extent. Many times when standing before a congregation of people, his countenance was resplendent with the light and inspiration of the Holy Ghost. Many people were impressed with the divinity of the message which he bore, and some honest in heart remarked, "Surely you must be inspired, or you could not speak as you do." In missionary labor, Brother Taylor in a happy manner always adapted himself to the circumstances of the people with whom he labored. He would help them plow the corn, work in the cotton or tobacco fields, and while side by side with the farm laborers, he was equal or superior to them in speed and endurance. While thus working in the field, he would preach the gospel to those about him. Yeah, he was very much a person of the people. He liked to get down on their level and look them in the eye, He had great faith in administering to the sick, and many were healed under his administration. The spirit of prophecy is enjoyed to a marked extent by Elder Taylor. The following occurrences will serve to bear out this statement. When he read the inaugural address of President James A. Garfield, a spirit of inspiration came upon him, and he remarked, "Something will happen to that man." On learning of the assassination of the president some months later, Elder Taylor's missionary companion, to whom the prophetic utterance was made, recalled the prediction. Yeah, in case you don't know, James A. Garfield, President James A. Garfield was assassinated. He was shot. I'm pretty sure he was shot, but yeah. While laboring with Elder Bigler, the 2 approached a house one evening and applied for entertainment. Filled with the gift of inspiration, Brother Taylor, in his characteristic manner, said, "We have a message for you from heaven, and if you will entertain us, it shall be made known to you by dreams this very night that we are the true servants of the Lord." That's quite a bold statement, yeah? They were invited in, and their wants provided for. That night the father of the household, as well as some of the children, had dreams that were satisfying to them that the elders they were entertaining were servants of the Lord. The mother also had a dream or vision which was most assuring to her mind that these men were sent of God. In this dream a heavenly messenger appeared to her. She had been for some time in a quandary about what religion of those she was acquainted with was the right one. So she inquired of this messenger concerning the matter. Thereupon there passed before her all the preachers of the neighborhood with whom she was acquainted or had ever seen. Then the messenger asked if she was satisfied with either of them, and she replied that she was not. She was next carried away in a vision to a steep cliff, the top of which she was trying to reach. One of the sectarian preachers whom she had before met appeared above her and offered something for her to grasp, and thereby draw herself up to the summit of the rock. What he held out to her proved to be nothing but a straw, and it snapped in two the moment she caught hold of it. He next offered a stick, but this too proved to be useless, as it was rotten. Presently Elder Taylor appeared on the top of the cliff. He offered his hand to help her up, and she at once gained the desired footing upon the rock. She was still not entirely satisfied as to who had the truth. Another scene then presented itself to view. An open field spread out before her, in which appeared all the preachers she had previously saw in her vision. In a moment they all vanished from her sight, and directly before her there stood the 2 Mormon elders, who had received shelter under her roof. Upon being asked again by the messenger if she was satisfied, she replied that she was. The family was afterwards baptized into the church. Some time later, Elder Taylor, on leaving the house, one very clear, bright morning, said to a little girl belonging to the same family, whom he saw in the front yard, "My little girl, a storm is coming here today." The child told her parents what the elder had said, and they, in their honest confidence in the word of Brother Taylor, without waiting for further indications of a storm, housed themselves up and waited for its approach. Sure enough, in the afternoon, a howling tornado came and did considerable damage. But the family, who believed in a living prophet, prepared for the predicted event and escaped all harm. Jeez. Up until this point, this story of John W. Taylor, it's so impressive. He's one of those people where you're like, oh, he's definitely going to be an apostle someday, because he is so in tune with the Spirit. Not because you think that he's done something necessarily to deserve it, but it's just he's so in tune. He's so in tune that you can definitely picture it, and then it all goes so wrong. It just shows how people who are very prepared aren't necessarily the best people. Sometimes it comes as a surprise. And yeah, it's really crazy when you watch the Lord's will happening. Yeah? It's not logical. And yet, I feel like this man had all of the opportunities. He had all of the possible preparations that he possibly could have had. Yeah? It's so interesting. All right. On the 19th of March, 1882, while laboring in the Rochester, Butler County, Kentucky on this same mission, he wrote a letter to Elder Matthias F. Cowley, who at the time was also laboring as a missionary in St. Louis, Missouri. In this letter, he made the prediction, "I believe I speak by the spirit of prophecy when I say, if you are faithful, you will yet become one of the 12 apostles of the Church of Jesus Christ in all the world, and by the power of God and the eternal priesthood will become great in wisdom and knowledge. Amen." Oh, it's so crazy. The 2 of them, yeah, they're just they both became apostles, by the way. No one but the 2 elders knew of this prophecy until after its fulfillment 15 years later, when Elder Cowley was chosen and ordained an apostle. Another incident in his career will serve to show his inspirational nature. While addressing a public meeting on the principles of the gospel during his labors in the Colorado mission, he became impressed that a certain lady who was present would accept the gospel. At the close of the meeting, he inquired of her what she thought of the doctrines she had heard. The lady expressed herself as being pleased and willing to hear more about the faith of the Latter-day Saints. An appointment was therefore made for Elder Taylor to visit her and her husband. The result was the lady soon afterwards joined the church. Upon his return from the southern states, Elder Taylor was called as a counselor to Elder Joseph H. Felt, president of the Young Men's Mutual Improvement Associations of the Salt Lake Stake. In this position, he labored with his characteristic energy and vim. In the spring of 1884, he was chosen to fill a vacancy in the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, being ordained an apostle on April 9th of that year by his father, who was then president of the church. Years previous to his ordination to this office, it had been predicted that he would receive this calling. The prediction was made by a sister who spoke in tongues in a fast meeting on the 14th Ward, Salt Lake City. Since his call to the apostleship, much of his time has been devoted to the ministry, and he has fulfilled many important callings of a public character which have been made upon him by those in authority. Once he went to Washington, D.C. in company with others and presented to President Grover Cleveland an appeal from the saints for their rights. In 1884, he went on a mission to Mexico and had the privilege, while there, of meeting President Diaz. On his return from the mission, he served a term in the Utah legislature. Another mission given him was to preach to the people of the Uinta Stake. Here he performed a good work, bringing a large number of people there into the church, and awakening to renewed spiritual life many church members who had become cold and indifferent. He has had considerable business transactions with the government officials of Canada, by whom he is held in high esteem. In 1887, he had an interview with the then Canadian Premier, Sir John A. Macdonald, and to whom he had the privilege of bearing testimony to the truth of the gospel. His labors in the interest of the colonies of the Latter-day Saints in Canada have been persistent and fruitful. By his practical preaching and inspired prophesying, he has greatly encouraged the saints in that newly settled country, and has endeared himself to them by the interest he has taken in their spiritual as well as temporal welfare. In 1896, he was called to open a mission of the church in the adjoining state of Colorado. Elders Herbert A. White, William C. Clive, J. H. Boshard, H. S. Ensign, and F. C. Graham were assigned as missionaries to the same field to assist him in the work. In the latter part of December 1896, he proceeded to Denver, some of his fellow missionaries having gone there a few days before. Here the brethren at once began active labors, traveling without purse or scrip. Their efforts were attended with success, and within 6 months some 44 persons were baptized. The work there has continued to grow and spread, and now 2 branches of the church are established in that mission, one in Denver and the other in Pueblo, and over 300 people have been brought into the fold in this state alone. The mission now embraces Colorado, Wyoming, New Mexico, and Arizona. Elder Taylor is still president of the mission. His call to this work and the success that would attend the labors of the elders there were foretold through the gift of tongues before any move was made to open up the work in that part of the country. In many respects, Apostle Taylor is quite unlike the generality of mankind, and he possesses a combination of traits that is somewhat uncommon. And while these traits are what might be regarded as peculiarities, they are nevertheless evidences of moral strength and independence of spirit, as well as originality of thought and action. He is preeminently spiritually minded, and will be readily perceived from what has been related in the foregoing, and his talents, while not of a showy kind, are such as to fit him admirably for the public ministry. As a missionary, he is highly successful. He has baptized over 250 new converts to the gospel, most of whom accepted the truth through his personal ministration. Having a wide acquaintance with scriptures and being sound in the doctrine, as well as apt in illustration, by means of anecdote and incident, he is always able to hold the attention of his hearers, whether in private conversation or in public speaking. What is more important, his preaching evinces great freedom of the spirit. At times he speaks with much power, and his words carry conviction to the hearts of those who listen. Again, particularly when speaking upon everyday duties, his remarks are replete with wise counsel and suggestion, accompanied often with quaint humor. Edwin F. Parry. This was amazing. I really love that article, and it just has such great information in it. It's probably one of the best articles about his life that I have read when I was preparing my own version, my own article on it. And I used a lot of information from it because it's really, really good. I do appreciate this article being very, very good. So what happened afterwards, yeah? So I will read from my own article, post-1900, yes? Because they didn't actually talk about the incident that happened later in this article, okay? So basically, John W. Taylor had a very strong testimony of many points of doctrine. One of those points of doctrine was plural marriage. He felt very, very strongly that plural marriage was of God. And while I don't think that that's a bad thing by itself, for sure, and he was a polygamist as well, but most of the prominent people in the church were at the time. So that's not unusual by itself. However, when the Manifesto of 1890 came out from President Woodruff, John W. Taylor felt that it was almost a slight to his father, and he was almost like personally insulted by it, if that makes sense. Said he really was upset. Elder Taylor found his faith tried when President Woodruff announced the Manifesto renouncing plural marriage in 1890. This doctrine was one that he had always had a strong testimony of and had testified of its truthfulness many times in his life. His father had had 9 wives and 34 children. He himself had 3 wives and was happy to live the law. This was a principle that he struggled with the rest of his life after it was rescinded. Shortly following the official manifesto from President Wilford Woodruff, fellow apostle Abraham H. Cannon recorded Elder Taylor's response in his journal. When I, Elder Taylor, first heard of this manifesto, I felt to say, "Damn it," but on further thought I felt it was not right to be so impulsive. I do not yet feel quite right about it. My father, when president of the church, sought to find a way to evade the conflict between the saints and the government on the question of plural marriage, but the Lord said that it was an eternal and unchangeable law and must stand. President Woodruff lately received an encouraging revelation in regard to this principle, and now I ask myself, is the Lord a child that he thus changes? Yet I feel that the Lord giveth a law, and he can also take it away. So that is in the journal of Abraham H. Cannon, which was printed and made public by his family after his death, and which is full of great information if you're interested in church history. It's very interesting, so I can highly recommend it. In subsequent years, he continued to express his doubts that the Lord would ever rescind such a law. He claimed that among his father's papers, he found evidence that the law of plural marriage was meant to be eternal and would never be changed. Regardless of his feelings on the matter, he tried his best to continue to live as he felt the Lord would want. As a result, he was blessed with many manifestations of the Spirit. At a meeting in the Salt Lake Temple in April 1894, Elder Taylor testified that he had seen Joseph Smith, who died years before his birth, and testified to his greatness. In 1896, he was called to open the mission in Colorado. Yeah, okay, we just heard about that. Oh, I remember this. Okay, so in 1898, I think, he gave a talk in general conference that a lot of people were very upset by. So I'm going to read the short version, yeah? So, however, when called upon to reprove, Elder Taylor could be startlingly direct. This caused him complications at times. There was some discussion caused by his talk at the October 1898 General Conference. It's up on my website, by the way, if you want to check it out. It's very interesting. Elder Taylor's topic was a call to repentance to those who were breaking the law of chastity. He particularly cited rumors of members of the Mormon Tabernacle Choir visiting a brothel following choir practice. Several members of the choir took offense at his words and refused to sustain him as an apostle. Elder Taylor met with those opposed to him personally following the meeting and apologized for any offense he had caused them. I just thought it was so funny. It was one of those, like, imagine if that happened today. Like, yeah, you're skirting on the dangerous there, Elder Taylor. In 1901, so this is shortly after this article was written, Elder John W. Taylor married 2 more women. Sisters Rhoda and Eliza Roxy Welling. Elder John W. Taylor, as well as Elder Matthias F. Cowley, both resigned from the Quorum of the 12 Apostles effective 28 October 1905 over a dispute regarding plural marriage. In meetings together, the 2 friends were not in harmony with the First Presidency and other apostles. They stated that they were unable to accept the meaning and scope of the original manifesto, nor were they able to agree with the second declaration of President Joseph F. Smith, declaring that those who were found marrying plural wives in the future would be excommunicated. It was widely known at the time that the 2 of them had performed more than a few plural marriage after the manifesto was issued. Their resignations helped to symbolize the true end of plural marriage in the church. Yeah, I remember this very well, and this is the reason why he was excommunicated later, because he wouldn't stop. Yeah, he was told so many times, okay, no more plural marriages, and he's like, what are you talking about? It's still fine. And he kept doing it. Like, he wouldn't take reproof. He could give reproof, but he couldn't take it. Yeah. In his resignation letter, Elder Taylor said, I have always believed that the government of the United States had jurisdiction only within its own boundaries, and that the terms law of the land and the manifesto meant merely the laws of the United States. I find now that this opinion is different to that expressed by the church authorities, who have declared that the prohibition against plural marriages extended to every place and to every part of the church. It is doubtless true that this view of the matter has been given by President Woodruff and others, but I have never taken that as binding upon me or the church, because such interpretation was never presented for adoption by common consent, as was the manifesto itself, and I have disputed its authority as a law or a rule in the church. Can you believe that? He's like, no, I'm exempt to that rule, because I never accepted it. It's like, honey, you don't have to accept it for it to be a law, 6 years later, John W. Taylor was excommunicated from the church because he had married another plural wife, Ellen Georgina Sandberg, in June of 1909, after the Second Manifesto. This was accepted by him without protest, and he harbored no bitterness toward the church. John W. Taylor died on 10 October 1916 at age 58 following a long battle with stomach cancer. Before his death, he married a total of 6 wives and fathered 29 children. Sheesh. Now, I'm going to skip the quotes, but I'm going to jump down to the conclusion. So what kind of man was John W. Taylor? He was a man of strong convictions and many spiritual gifts. He believed in revelation. He studied the scriptures and the words of the living prophets. He was a zealous and successful missionary. He was a dynamic and effective teacher. He lived what he preached. No one could ever accuse him of being a hypocrite. He had a strong testimony of the gospel and of plural marriage. His biggest problem was that he had a hard time accepting that God could rescind a law once given to the church. He kept his convictions according to the dictates of his own conscience and continued to practice this rescinded law. This eventually led to his excommunication. Many aspects of his life and personality, however, are well worth imitating. Any missionary, for example, would become a better teacher by imitating his teaching style. So that's what I think of him. I also like to pick out a scripture that goes along with each person that I write about. And so this is from Doctrine and Covenants 132:38. David also received many wives, and in nothing did they sin, save in those things which they received not of me. And so I feel like this very much applies to John W. Taylor. I feel like he was very upright and righteous until he wasn't. Yeah? I mean, it reminds me of David. It was, you are very righteous and you're doing the right thing until you stop doing it. Yeah? And you just get very rigid in your ideas, and then all of a sudden you're like, yeah, and you went too far. You went too far. Yeah? And I feel like this is very much John W. Taylor in a nutshell. He was very, very strong in the church, and then he went too far. I'm not trying to criticize him. I'm really not. I think that he was a very good person and a person worth emulating in general. However, he went too far. And I think that's something that we all need to remember, is that it's possible for anyone to go too far, to not be humble enough to say, I can make a mistake myself. Yeah? If you are humble enough to say, I could be wrong, then you are humble enough to take criticism and to change yourself. And I think that's kind of like the most important thing to learn from this story. So I don't think it's a bad story based on like the information, the person, the character of the person. I think it's a good story. Yeah. I just think that it is possible, and it will always be possible, to take something too far. So don't forget that. That's my advice. I find him a really interesting person, and I would definitely encourage anyone to become more like him, you know? Spend your free time memorizing scriptures and share the gospel with everybody you ever meet. And I think it's really, really good. So, yeah. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed that today. If you did, give the video a like and subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you in the next video.